Today I want to introduce a really important module. It's called Systems Thinking in Business. Someone once told me that when a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, it goes through the chrysalis stage. And during this stage, the butterfly doesn't just grow a couple of wings and legs. Rather, it totally reabsorbs into the elemental juices, and these eventually recombine to make a totally different animal. You know, when I was first introduced to systems thinking, I felt a bit like that butterfly. I could no longer think in quite the same way as before. In a very real sense, I was a different animal. And I hope this module helps change you also. My name is Bruce Holland. I'm the author of the book Cracking Great Leaders and designer of the Cracking Great Leaders program. There are many reasons why you should use this module with your clients. But probably the most important one is that the world is changing and analysis is no longer enough. I mean, yesterday, the world of business used to be pretty square, pretty regular, pretty predictable, pretty linear. And yesterday's business could be the same. Square, linear, analytical, predictable, straight lines. But today, the world of business is very different. It's more messy. It's more what the scientists call wicked. Difficult to understand, difficult to get your hands on, many influences, lots of emergence happening outside the control of most managers. And as a result, today's business needs to be similar. Back here in the days of certainty, we could pretty accurately predict where the future would be as long as we knew where we were now. A few decades ago, it got a little bit riskier, and we could make, lower and upper estimates of where it was. Today, if we're back here, it's really hard in most industries to know whether we're going to be in the upper limit or the lower limit. And the difference is like total. So because the world's changed, our current business assumptions and our business model is highly questionable. We assume businesses are mechanical, and many of the products we produce in organisations today can be the products of mechanical systems. They obey Newtonian laws, they're linear, with all their parts connected in a line, and their behaviours are easily understood and predicted by dismantling them and studying the parts. But today, in this more wicked world, it's much more likely that we're dealing with an organic system or a living system. Like people are organic and living, cities are organic and living, and most organisations are organic and living. They need to adapt to their environment, and they do not obey Newtonian laws. And their behaviours are not easily understood or predicted by dismantling them, studying the parts. To understand them, you need to be able to see the whole system. And this is why systems thinking is so important and is starting to overtake analysis in many organisations. We value separation more than joining up. So typically, our business models are all about analysis, dividing, splitting up, breaking down into divisions, into jobs, into processes, into microprocesses, and so on. What science and business are starting to understand is that a better and more accurate belief is that we're much more connected than most people think. We need to pay more attention to seeing the whole systems thinking, and holism. Otherwise, we'll continue to optimize the parts at the expense of the whole system. We assume competition is the natural order, but a more accurate and helpful belief is that collaboration is the natural order. Even Darwin said this. His theory is based on survival of the fittingest. Those that fit best into their natural environment will survive. But in organisations, we value competition. We put department against department. We put Bruce against Peter, and we ask them to compete, when actually a far better result would be obtained if they collaborated and cooperated. We assume that more control leads to more order, but studies in science and complexity are showing that more control leads to less order. And a more accurate and helpful belief is that less control leads to more order. This sounds counterintuitive, and I'll explain it a little bit more later. Some of the main parts in this module include why connecting is better than breaking apart. I mean, you can take a watch and you can pull it apart, and from that you get a much better understanding of how the watch works. But try and do that with an ant. Try pulling an ant apart and seeing how much you understand how the whole thing works. Or do it with people, or do it with organisations. And yet this is what managers always tend to do. They don't try and take an overview, a systemic look at what's happening in their organisations. They dive into what's going wrong and they try and fix it. And when they fix that bit, they'll probably find that in a few months' time or some other part of the organisation, the same problem will occur again. It tells why top-down can't work. The module does this by reference to Barry Oshie, who runs a training course at Harvard and has run a workshop experiment hundreds of times by putting people randomly into groups of tops, middles and bottoms. And each time, within less than a day, the same behaviours start to emerge. The tops feel overwhelmed with complexity and too many decisions and too much work. The middles feel wishy-washy and want to help but feel they can't. And the bottoms feel that no one loves them, no one sees them, nobody cares about them. And so top-down can be shown experimentally time after time that it will not work. And yet most organisations are designed this way. The module explains why excess control can lead us away from the sweet spot. You see, there is a sweet spot where organisations want to self-organise to. And too much control means that things clam up. There's too much effort to try and get through all the controls and the rules and the procedures and the structures. And too much lack of control means that people are actually fighting each other and there's anarchy going on. Let it fall into that sweet spot and trust that the system will work. That's where systems come in. Trust that the system will work, and we will automatically achieve the sweet spot of business. The power of emergence is vitally important in any organisation. See, emergence is the name that a group of scientists called complexity sciences have given to how simple things can come together and self-organise themselves into tremendously complex systems. Examples could be, how the human brain comes together, how the internet comes together, how the ecosystem comes together, how organisations can come together. They emerge without any over-control. And the module goes into this and the power of it. It talks about why structures should not be straight lines. Earlier on we said you could think of an organisation and the environment like that straight line box. And in the past that was probably not too far from truth. But today it's so far from the truth that it's no longer an acceptable assumption. We need to start drawing our organisations more like beanbags or amoebas or something that can be flexible and move very close to where the customer is and allow people a great deal of self-control over how they do things. It talks about how systems can influence behaviours. If the system is wrong, then the behaviours will be wrong. In a bad system, you will get bad behaviours. In a good system, you'll get good behaviours. The module talks about a new role for managers, and it shows you how to draw and understand the system. Because once you've seen the system and its feedback loops and its vicious cycles and its virtuous cycles and how they all come together and they relate to each other and make the whole, you get a totally different understanding of how your organisation works. So we've talked about the sweet spot. And the sweet spot is a point where there's not too much order and there's not too much disorder. Let the organisation emerge. So over here, where it's too ordered, we've got too many roles and controls and procedures and structure, and managers too top-down trying to control things. Over here, and they take away all controls and all procedures, and people obviously need to be controlled, but they need self-control. It's self-control that's really important, not imposed control. Most managers assume business to be like this, where the big fish are eating the small fish. But actually, when you start to see systems thinking and emergence coming together so that small people on their own can come together and emerge into something that's far more powerful, then you get something like this, where the small fish can actually take on the big fish. Now, this isn't some mad theoretical argument. It's the way that Wikipedia works. And Wikipedia is now taking on the might of Britannia. It's also the way that Skype works. It's the way that Visa International works. It's the way that Alcoholics Anonymous works. And there are lots of other examples where emergence, immune management practices based on systems thinking, how people can come together with limited control and have enormous power to take on the big guys. In this module, we show you how to visualize and draw your system. Now, I found this piece of the module worth its weight in gold. If it's the only thing you get out of it, then it's worth buying this module for. Because I've made thousands of dollars going to a client, listening to them describe a problem, coming back a few days later with this problem described in a systems map a bit like this, so they can see exactly what's happening and how to fix it. So this particular case was where a manager was over-controlling, so micromanaging. And the staff weren't feeling happy and they were disempowered, and so there was high staff turnover and they were too busy doing stuff and there were bottlenecks and too many last minute. And so you got this going around here into this big vicious cycle. And there was lack of action and customer dissatisfaction. And as a result, there were complaints. And there was a lack of leadership in the sector. And so there was more customer dissatisfaction and into another vicious cycle, going around and round here, going further and further down the gurgler. And we've got another one here. They were too busy doing stuff. So there was a lack of written procedures and there was inconsistent decision making, which made them even busier trying to fix the mistakes they made. Another vicious cycle going on. And over here, staff were disempowered, high turnover, loss of institutional knowledge. And because there was a loss of institutional knowledge, it forced the chief executive to micromanage into areas that she could take her hands off. And because she was micromanaging, the staff felt more disempowered and so on. So a whole series of vicious cycles. Now, in most models, there are some vicious cycles. They're not all bad like this. And there are some virtuous cycles. And the aim of a systems analysis is to look at the vicious cycles and try and cut them out wherever possible, and look at the virtuous cycles and try and amplify them, make them bigger. So this is a great way to see what's actually happening. Until this was shown to the management, there was no understanding of what the dynamics were. People were frustrated, they were leaving, they were unhappy, there were tears. And it wasn't just the people at the bottom of the organisation, it was the people at the top and the board who actually called me in to help. So the whole organisation was really, really unhappy. And there was some clear indicators here about what was going wrong and how to help it. Now, I've done this sort of analysis a dozen times, and each time I've charged a lot of money to come back with some suggestions and some solutions. And so this is a module which will show you how to do this, and it's surprisingly simple but surprisingly uncommon. So this module will add enormous value. It will help you see the whole system. What's working? The virtuous cycles that we need to expand and amplify. And what's not working, the vicious cycles that are taking us down the gurgler, so that we can cut them off and starve them. But most importantly, you'll become like this different animal. You'll be reabsorbed and you'll be reborn as something quite different. Much more likely to be able to solve the real problems in the organisation. Much more likely to give proper and lasting advice to your clients. Now, I'm not suggesting that straight line thinking is wrong. It's just that today it's insufficient and we need more systems thinking. There are occasions when straight line analytical thinking is perfectly adequate if it's for short time periods and stable conditions. But unfortunately, that's not very often the case in today's business world. Your next steps are to become familiar with the reading. If you haven't done a lot of work in systems thinking, you need to really study this carefully. So download the readings and understand them. Download the process and understand it, and then you'll be able to deliver a module which will dramatically change the way your clients think about their business and solve their problems and allocate their resources where they matter most. And you'll be able to collect your revenue much more quickly than it's taken me many years of deep and intense research to understand the principles and the processes that are developed and delivered in this module. It's worked wonders with my clients. So my call to action is to buy this module. It will explain all you need for a really successful workshop. But it will give you the readings, the exercises, and the processes which will take you there. It'll help you get this thinking into the organisation that you're working with. And it's a process that works.